when I was in Columbus and when I was working in Richmond, there was a lot of financial support that was going into children's mental health and the resources available. And if you look at how inpatient programs are run when they have the appropriate supports in place, it just looks very different than here in DC, how some of those programs are run. You know, we think of windowless places here in DC. You don't get to see the outside because it's not safe to have a window. It can be safe to have a window. It just has to be the appropriate type of glass, right? The inpatient unit that I worked in during my training had windows everywhere. Each kiddo had their own room. They got individual therapy daily. They had art therapy. They had activities planned throughout the day. They got school while they were there. They had family therapy daily. And so as a psychologist working there, you get assigned like 6 patients and you see each of those individually daily, and then you also maybe run 1 or 2 groups a week, right? And so they're getting this full spectrum of services. They're interacting only with people who have been trained in how to de-escalate a situation without using holds. So
what did you think about psychology? Like, what got you into psychology before?
Well, I mean, in undergrad, I did major in psychology, which was no fun because I thought I might want to do something in it, but then I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after undergrad, and I actually spent a year working in foster care in Houston, Texas, with kids 4 years and younger, and the place I worked for specialized in working with kids who had had like HIV/AIDS exposure, and you would be kind of put in a home with one other adult for kids 4 years and younger, and then like manage their behaviors, deal with the transition to and from parents. Some of them were frequent flyers, and then they go back to parents and come back to us, and had to go back and forth. And I think that's ultimately what made me decide I wanted to pursue psychology. You know, you take those kids to therapists, you learn those skills and all of that stuff, and that's where I kind of learned that was something I was interested in, I wanted to do.
Yeah. Did you ever consider going into like the clinical social work side of therapy, or like what made you decide psychology was the right one for you?
I had never considered social work. Social work does not have quite the same amount of training in the therapy modalities that you get as a psychologist, and you can't do the assessments if you're a clinical social worker. So assessing and diagnosing would have been off the table. And so for that reason, I chose psychology, but I think also a lot of us probably end up choosing what we go into based on very little knowledge about how else we can get there, right? So I tell people when they talk to me, I'm like, look at social work, okay? If you don't know it exists, look at clinical social work, because I spent 6 years in training after undergrad to get to where I am, and you can do it in 2 years with social work.
Okay.
You don't have all the range, but if all you want to do is therapy, social work is a good way to get there too.
Do you ever feel resentment for that discovery? Like, damn, I could have done this in 2 years, but I did it in 6?
I don't, but I do more than therapy still. So I think I would definitely feel the resentment if I didn't enjoy doing things outside of the therapy component. Then I would be like, oh, come on, like, why did I do that? And I paid for it.
So what do you do exactly?
So I work in an integrated primary care setting with kids, and there we offer consult-based services, which is when they come to see their doctor, like Jory, if they bring up mood concerns or behavior concerns or like adjustments to diagnoses or life changes, stuff like that, she can pull me right in during that visit with her and I can talk with the family and get them started on some things that might help with those issues. So that's one of the big things I do. I also do short-term therapy for kiddos. So in DC, wait lists for anywhere to get in for therapy, med management, anything are ridiculously long. And so we can get people in for some bridging services until they link somewhere else, or if all they need is some short-term services, just get them the short-term services there.
Yeah.
Typically, patients don't wait more than, I'd say, a month to get in initially, and then we figure out their follow-up from there. And then we also do assessments, and we're working currently on building out a lot of our primary care assessments to look at like intellectual disabilities, learning concerns, ADHD, all of those things, so that kids don't have to wait, 9 months to get in for one of those.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What about autism?
Autism is very complicated, and a lot of that has to do with the way that insurance is set up. So insurance has, in many areas, decided that they need very specific testing in order to provide services for kids who've been diagnosed with autism, or they need very specific types of reports in order to do that. So there are some kids where you can really have just a thorough 1-hour intake interview with them and know that autism is something that's going on, but you can't diagnose it from that. You still need to provide the testing and the screeners. So we haven't done a lot of them in clinic yet. However, what we're working on is for those kids who are really clearly struggling with autism, maybe they even already have a school diagnosis, but they don't have a diagnosis through the medical system. We're working on figuring out what screeners can we use in a way that's efficient for us, because if we do the same thing everyone else does, we get backed up a year too. So what can we use that's efficient for us, that meets the criteria that insurance has put in place for that, so that these kids who very clearly have it can just get assessed, diagnosed quickly, and then move forward with treatment. But it's still in the works.
Yeah.
How much patience do you have to have with something that's still developing?
What do you mean by that?
Like, you said it's still in the works, so you guys are putting it together as you go. Do you set a finish line like, hey, when we're finished or when it's complete in terms of the process, this is how it should look and flow?
Yeah.
I mean, I think in an ideal world, that's exactly how it would work. You would have the process laid out before you start. You would then trial it with a few patients, change some things as needed.
Yeah.
In our world, we've already done a few. And so we kind of sometimes put the cart ahead of the horse, I guess. So it takes, I would say, it takes some time to get it up and running, but because everyone on our team is really flexible about being able to do some things as we go and be flexible about how we're building it and why we're building it and all of that stuff, it tends to move a little more quickly than if we were to wait until we had finalized all of our ideas. It does mean that we sometimes trip up a bit though and run into issues as we go and that we have to solve too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Being a doctor is hard.
Can be.
I think it often, but I just, when I hear different stories from different doctors, I'm just like, damn, wow, wow, that's spicy. Ooh, self-care, a lot of self-care after a day like that. Yeah. And then you're also doing this live, because it's like, your patients are going to be like, no, we'll wait right here. Your patients are like, hey, how come you haven't seen us yet? What's going on? We're here to get treated. You're supposed to help me. You're a doctor. You got the DR before your name. What's going on?
Yeah. Yeah, you're saying that kind of metaphorically, but like in real time.
Yeah.
It's been 5 minutes since their appointment started, and they're saying, "Where's the doctor?"
And then if they come in for an inappropriate problem, and you have to say, "I can't help you with this. I can get you linked to someone else." That's also hard, because the last thing you want to do is feel useless. The last thing the patient wants to do is have to go to another appointment that they possibly have to wait for, and then everyone leaves unhappy.
Yeah.
What does a day like that feel like? Like, what's the recovery period for a doctor on a day like that?
Depends how many patients you have like that in one day.
How many times does a doctor In a day, would you say people don't really realize what your specialty is or what kind of doctor you guys are?
That happens all the time for me because of psychology versus psychiatry.
All right, explain that.
So psychologists have not gone to med school. They spend their 6 years of training really training in assessing, diagnosing, and then providing play therapy, talk therapy, behavior therapy, those types of things to patients. Psychiatrists have gone to med school. They don't typically have much training in therapy. What they have training in is the medication management, more behavioral conditions. And so we definitely, they're almost the same words. So we have families come in all the time thinking that they're going to be able to get med management and then being told that that's not possible for us to do. I literally can't write a script for medication. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, primary care doctor is so vague that they assume that I can do everything.
Well, you do have the word primary, which means you're
I'm the first person, but I can get you to where you need to go, but I know a little bit about a lot of things. And so I'm not able to necessarily diagnose why your knee isn't fully flexing back or extending forward. That's an orthopedist that would need to be able to do that. Or I had somebody come in because they wanted an exemption for their child, from receiving shots. But it was for religious exemptions. Okay, well, you have to go to your religious person, like the priest or whoever says in that religion that you guys can't receive vaccines.
And I don't have religion in my name, just a DR.
And so now they waited, 15 minutes until I could get to them to hear this, and they're pissed off. I wasted my time. It's hard to even get an appointment where we work. And so you probably waited maybe a month for your appointment, and then you get here and you realize you're not even going to give me what I've waited all this time for. So that can be very frustrating, and that happens to me a lot. Maybe on a good day it might happen twice. On a bad day it's half the people.
That's a lot. How does insurance play to that? I remember we had this talk about insurance earlier, and I was like, ooh, that is spicy.
A lot of patients that we see have Medicaid, and Medicaid is very rigid. And so, let's say for the girl who injured her knee, she went to the emergency room. But for some reason, and I still do not understand this, the emergency room often says, we'll go to your primary care provider for referral to the orthopedic surgeon. Okay, so why couldn't you click that button that says refer to ortho?
Oh, so they can click a button this whole time?
Yeah, but it's followed with your PCP. So now, that's another waste of time and, healthcare utilization.
This issue right there. It's just I had technical difficulties the whole time you guys started this. Okay. So I was just over here I gotta figure this out. This is not working today for me.
Yeah, so that's very frustrating for them and for me because I'm emotionally investing in every patient encounter, and so to go through this long interview process where I'm trying to get to the bottom of what's going on and what you need, just to find I'm not the person that you need, it's exhausting and frustrating.
For sure. Thank you. Does the same hold true for you?
Kind of and kind of no. Medicaid works in my favor a lot of times, currently at least.
Okay.
Current kids coverage, because it covers therapy and all of those things without pre-authorizations for the most part. So I don't have to worry about a lot with Medicaid that I do have to worry about with private insurance. However, I would say the hard thing is, every kid I see is complex and has a list of stuff going on that's probably affecting their mood and behavior. And I'm often not the appropriate person for them to go to just because I can't provide long-term therapy services in the setting that I work in. And so more so than that, I hit this issue of, okay, I've got a kid with Medicaid. The core agencies in DC are backed up or aren't returning phone calls or whatever the case may be.
Where else do I send them?
Yeah, where else do I send them? Or For example, there are very few places to go inpatient for kids if they need inpatient care. There are no places to send a kid with DC Medicaid for residential care. So there are just like huge gaps in the care system as well. And I would say that's what I run into with insurance more often than anything else.
You kind of already answered this before we started doing the interview. Is the infrastructure set up like this on purpose?
DC's infrastructure is lacking compared to other states that I've worked in, and I think it's partially because of where DC falls, right? They don't have the same government structure as a state.
Yeah.
And they don't have the same resources as a state does. So I think that DC does its best with what it has, but it's lacking, right? In other states, I can send a kid a half-hour away for residential treatment if I have to on Medicaid, and they're in the same jurisdiction, so that place would take them.
Yeah.
Maryland and Virginia both have places I can send people, they just don't take DC Medicaid. So I think it's a little bit unique for behavioral health services, at least. I don't know as much about the medical services.
I don't understand enough about politics and government structures to say, yes, it was intentionally structured this way or no. But it seems like DC has a lot of extra money. Like during the pandemic, kids were sent, I don't know, at least $100 a week or maybe even more than that just for food. And households were getting that per child. Or I don't know. I don't even know what other money there is, but it just seems like there is a lot of money that's then funneled to other places and not towards healthcare. Although there is this program called Health Services for Children with Special Needs, HSCSN, and that seems to be the best form of Medicaid, but you have to have some type of chronic condition like autism, or I think ADHD, depending on how severe it is, or like a cancer, or like something significant that requires a lot of specialty care and services. But most people don't qualify for that, because then that's when the rules come in about like you need to have these certain reports in order for you to qualify for this level of insurance. And that can be its own barrier because families can't navigate the system to understand exactly what they need.
And even if they do navigate the system, they might end up waiting. Like I think our wait list, most recently I was updated that there was a like almost 2-year wait list for autism emails. So a lot of places, particularly for like autism or neuropsych evaluations for things like intellectual disabilities, learning disorders, ADHD, those typically range somewhere from like 9 months to 1.5 to 2 years. So it can take a really long time to get those reports to get on the appropriate insurance too.
And that's with the
within that time.
That's with the developmental pediatrician, right? Or are there other practitioners besides developmental pediatricians that can provide insurance?
Those reports don't have to be developmental pediatrician. I would say primarily they're from psychologists who are specializing in either neuropsychology or in pediatric developmental psychology. So I would say for the most part, the reports come from psychologists. It actually becomes difficult when developmental pediatricians diagnose because they don't write reports typically, and they don't necessarily use the measures that are expected to be used because that's not part of their training. And so they're perfectly capable of making the diagnosis and doing that correctly. That is a part of their training. But if they don't have the report and if they don't use the measures that insurance wants, then insurance won't take that diagnosis from them. So yeah.
How much do you guys talk about this in the office? Is this a topic, or is it just like there's so much work to do anyway?
Yeah, I get stuff here and there, like, because I ask questions, but I don't know if everybody does that. We don't have group discussions, like, as an office about, this type of thing. And there's a lot of work to be done, so we don't really have the time sometimes, because I'm one provider who consults Dr. Wolf, right? But then there are 4 other providers who are also consulting Dr. Wolf. And so she's like super busy trying to see everybody's patients.
Yeah, I would say for me, if I have a question about medical stuff, I ask you and you tell me what to do, and I assume that takes into account any insurance stuff that needs to happen. And I assume that doctors do the same for me, where they're going to be like trusting that I'm not going to send someone somewhere that would not allow for insurance to deal with things appropriately. But
I'm sorry to tell you, I don't have the insurance.
Good to know. Good to know. But
How important would you say your work is to the mental health side of things?
oh, I feel differently depending on the day.
Okay, so
I think sometimes it feels like nothing you do moves anything forward. Just because the system is so broken and it's so hard to get people to where they need to be. Like, I as a doctor can call places, leave my name, my phone number, let them know I need to refer a patient, and I can do that 3 or 4 times in a row and never get a call back. Just because everyone, I think, is so busy and overwhelmed, and the system isn't set up the way it needs to be. And so those days it feels like I'm not doing much for my patients, other than being someone who can like check in on them relatively regularly. Other days when you have more successes, or when I'm working with patients who do benefit from the services I can provide immediately in clinic, it feels like I am doing something. And I would say the truth is probably somewhere in between, which is sad, but probably the case. I hope that as I encounter more and more families, I'm at least decreasing fear and stigma of mental health services, and creating an environment where people will maybe seek them out in the future if they need them as well. But
I mean, I do think you're making a difference in that, because people ask, I want to see the psychologist.
it's true.
You know,
That's true.
whereas when I first started working there, that wasn't a request. I would have to inform them, hey, we have a person here that can help you.
That's true.
And you've brought it up in some of your stories too.
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
What should people expect of a psychologist when they show up asking for help or services?
That's a great question. That's a really hard one to answer because it's very dependent on the psychologist.
Okay.
So for me, if someone shows up asking for services, bottom line, I want to make sure that they feel like they were heard, that we have a plan in place. It might not be the end solution that we have in place, but it's at least a plan to figure it out moving forward, and that they feel like I'm a person that they can come back to, trust, that's not judging them or anything like that. Those are kind of my 3 things when I go in to meet a family. That's very different than someone who's trained as a specialty psychologist. They might have those goals, but they also typically walk into an appointment with a list of questions that they ask as like an intake for a patient. I wait and I do an intake after my first appointment so that parents don't feel like they're giving me a bunch of information that isn't necessarily relevant to the issue that they want support with, right? So it really varies from psychologist to psychologist, how they're trained, what their practice requires. There are places that will spend 2 hours doing intakes, and that's just information gathering, and they don't provide any interventions until they're done with that 2 hours of intakes.
Yeah.
There are other places that will provide intervention immediately. Sometimes you can't even get through the door and see a psychologist until someone else does an intake. So it looks very, very different based on the setting. But in primary care, at least, I think when we're pulled in, we try to get the basic information about whatever problem is going on, give at least one tip for how to start managing the problem, and come up with a plan, whether it's come back to us to do more work, whether it's let's send you somewhere else to do more work, just to get the family started.
Would you say you first got into the field, because you had a pivot coming into the field, has the field been everything you expected it to be, or would you say there's a couple of key differences that you wish you could have been better prepared for?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I think when I came into the field, it was what I expected it to be. And as I've worked in the field, I think that I see a lot of flaws that I wish would change that I just wasn't aware of or knowledgeable enough about when I initially entered to see as problematic.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of things that we as psychologists could do during our training to prep people to be able to, relate to families better, create those environments that feel more accepting, and all of that stuff that we currently don't do, and sometimes even put barriers around being able to do, that can sometimes cause problems or make families feel maybe even a little judged, which is not what I think anyone wants to leave, have a family leave feeling.
Under worries like liability and other things like that.
Those sorts of things, but even things like in school you're taught that you should never touch a patient. I work with kids. If a kid asks me for a hug and I say, no, I'm not going to hug you, what message does that give the kid about how trustworthy and safe a person I am, right? Sometimes people do need a little more physical comfort. I always ask before I touch someone if they haven't asked me. Like if I have a patient crying, I might say, do you mind if I rub your shoulder? Or something like that. But I think like physical support is important. I also think that there's probably some cultural components to that in the sense of like psychology comes out of white kind of European culture. And a lot of the research and training and standards put in place were related to that culture, and we are probably less of a touchy-feely culture. So it feels professional to not touch, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, we need to expand that to encompass other cultures, other perspectives, and giving hugs might be a part of that. Joking with your patients might be a part of that, right? Things like that. So I would say like as I've grown, I've become much more casual in how I approach my patients and families, and much more open about being flexible with some of those things, in a way that I would love to see the field grow as well.
We had an interview a couple months ago where we were talking about this very thing, where therapists and psychologists seem to be very cold in their interactions with patients, even the environment. Like one of the people we were interviewing said that she went to PSYD, and just the way that things were set up there was not conducive to somebody who's already experiencing some type of mental health crisis.
And I could go on about some of that stuff. Inpatient environments can be amazing if they're set up correctly. Most of them aren't. Most of them that I've dealt with, since moving here at least, are set up in a way where I feel like sometimes I do a patient more damage sending them than support. So I try to avoid it as much as possible because of that.
Where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Minnesota, but I did my graduate training in Indianapolis, and then I was in Richmond for my internship and Columbus for my fellowship before coming here.
Did you go by the lakes?
I did.
Okay, I asked because one of my friends is from Minnesota and he always talks highly about the lakes. So when you said Minnesota, I was like, Minnesota, okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
When you say where you were from originally compared to now, when you send patients somewhere, what are observations you've seen on where you came from compared to where you are now in terms of how things are ran or presented?
I would say, so like when I was in Columbus and when I was working in Richmond, there was a lot of financial support that was going into children's mental health and the resources available. And if you look at how inpatient programs are run when they have the appropriate supports in place, it just looks very different than here in DC, how some of those programs are run. we think of windowless places here in DC. You don't get to see the outside because it's not safe to have a window. It can be safe to have a window. It just has to be the appropriate type of glass, right? The inpatient unit that I worked in during my training had windows everywhere. Each kiddo had their own room.
I love how you call them kiddo.
Yeah. Each kiddo had their own room. They got individual therapy daily. They had art therapy. They had activities planned throughout the day. They got school while they were there. They had family therapy daily. And so as a psychologist working there, you get assigned like 6 patients and you see each of those individually daily, and then you also maybe run 1 or 2 groups a week, right? And so they're getting this full spectrum of services. They're interacting only with people who have been trained in how to de-escalate a situation without using holds. So the place that I worked, I won't name it, but we had an isolation room because it's legally required to have one. We also had no idea that the lock was on backwards for the first year we were in the building because we don't use it.
I can see how that would play out.
So yeah, you can de-escalate without holds, right? And like as a trainee there, I took a full day where they had their behavior management team that was specifically trained in how to do holds safely when they are absolutely needed. Train us in how to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there are ways that it can be done well, but what I see in places that aren't putting the money in is the facilities are just depressing in and of themselves, right? They're white, they're windowless, there isn't a lot of stuff to do. If we take away someone's phone and put it in a locked box, we have to then give them other activities. We can't just have them sitting around all day. That's not good for your mental health. They're not receiving daily therapy via multiple modalities all the time. We're using a lot of holds, not always correctly. Not using them correctly is dangerous. Can result in some serious injuries, sometimes even deaths if you don't use them correctly. We're using them too much. We're putting people in isolation because we can't control them otherwise. And so that's the big difference, right? You have less staff too, which is probably part of the reason some of those behavioral management techniques happen the way that they do. Because if you have less staff, it's harder to commit to de-escalating without a use of a hold or an isolation room.
Yeah, I've seen that inpatient as well, like in dealing with somebody who is aggressive or trying to elope. The first step is to restrain them, which that makes somebody more agitated. Like that doesn't really de-escalate the situation.
Doesn't that wall?
Yeah, I just wonder where that ideology comes from. Like, did Sigmund Freud say this is the best way?
I don't know about Sigmund Freud. What I will say is that's the history of residential treatment, right? It's restraint via medicine or via physical restraints. Luckily we've come a long ways from those first residential facilities, but they would, handcuff people to the beds to restrain them, right? And so I think that even though we've come far, that still sits there as an option.
Yeah.
And it tends to be the easiest option for the person managing the behavior. And so it's kind of if you have a whole bunch of other things going on, if you're overwhelmed, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they mean well, but they're really overwhelmed.
Yeah.
That's the option to go to, right?
Yeah.
That's going to calm the situation and keep everyone safe. It doesn't necessarily keep the person escalating safe, unfortunately, but I think that's how a lot of people think about it.
Even in psychiatry, like the difference in psychiatry versus psychology, if we had some more training around therapy for psychiatrists, because that's who we're consulting in the hospital, is a psychiatrist to deal with that type of patient. So they're going to prescribe medication. They probably chat with the patient for like 10 or 15 minutes, and then they go on with their rounding. But that's not really addressing the issue. That's kind of just like maybe even sometimes exacerbating the problem. Like I had a patient in residency. She was 17 in like a month from her 18th birthday. and she was transferred from PIW. Can't remember exactly why, but part of her history was that she was essayed by her brother when she was young, and so every night she's trying to leave, and the approach was to hold her down. And so, like, I can imagine, you're just re-traumatizing her night after night because of the L word, the liability that it would be to let her leave at 17, a month before her 18th birthday. Like,
yeah.
Are there any committees or organizations that both of you as doctors could talk to that would bring change, or is it still the institution versus the doctors at that point?
I hear people talking about like the political advocacy, because ultimately they're the lawmakers. They determine what regulations are in place in healthcare settings. I just have never been interested in that, just because I don't, and it may be cultural, I just don't have faith in the government. And I mean, the election results. And so I feel like my efforts are better geared towards like the grassroots level or like the individual than affecting the government. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there are definitely, and like we actually recently had a psychologist leave our team to go do some of the government level work for advocating for different policy changes. So there's certainly room for that. I will say that I personally feel like you have to give up a lot to do that, for psychology at least. I'm not as familiar with the MD side of things, but it's very rare to be in a work situation where you have the time to then also go and advocate for things. Like, I can't imagine taking an extra day out of clinic and trying to balance my clinic load and being able to go do that. And we just don't have, psychologists as is. It's kind of like a give and take. You take them away from that to go advocate for things. Mm-hmm. And that means you have a deficit in how many patients can be seen in a certain area, and we're already on wait lists and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a hard choice to make, because it's a choice of like stepping away from the clinical stuff.
Yeah.
So both of you are aware to the practices in terms of categories that you guys are as doctors saying, in terms of there's not a lot of food.
I would say yes, because PCPs are declining. The amount of people who go into it is declining, which is part of why there is such a wait list to get in to see your PCP. For psychologists, I think that I don't know if we're kind of staying at the same level, increasing, decreasing. I have no idea about that. What I know is that the demand far outweighs the resources that we currently have.
And if the demand goes up, but the people that are there, the number is the same, then Jesus.
Even aside from being a PCP, I think being a Black woman pediatrician is rare.
Mm-hmm.
But there are more Black female pediatricians and doctors in general than there are Black men. And so we used to have a Black male pediatrician, and he said people would drive their sons from far out in Maryland just to see him, because that's how rare it is to have a Black male pediatrician. But yeah.
You guys are pretty young. Because it's just like, it sounds like, I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, what does balance look like for people in your position that do this work? And there's such a dependency of the community of, well, I need you. Like, what does taking days off for your health look like? What does recovering for you guys look like? Like, personally in life, I'm proud of your work. I'm very proud of you. But then there's also the other side of, I don't want to put you in a position where you feel you have to do all these things that you're already doing, because you're already doing a good job.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And do you feel like that at times?
Yeah, I think it's hard to avoid. And I don't know for you, but I would say sometimes it feels even harder to avoid for psychology and primary care than for anyone else, because there are only two of us there, right? And so if I'm out for a day, there is no one in clinic to see those patients versus we have enough PCPs in clinic where if someone's out for a day, it doesn't mean rescheduling all the patients. It doesn't mean that they won't be seen by someone. So there's a lot of guilt, I think. But
I would argue, and this is part of like what I was saying, like before we started filming, that medical training is kind of toxic, and that it makes you feel like you are supposed to sacrifice way more than any other person in any other regular job would sacrifice. And so like she's talking about guilt. I mean, if I call out, that means that whole day of patients has to be rescheduled because every other provider who's there that day has a full schedule. So and we only have 20 slots per day. So it's not like the patients that I was going to see can just be put on somebody else's schedule. They have to be scheduled, a month out because we are already booked, 3 months out, So there is an element of guilt, but then you grow to a point where like the burnout outweighs the guilt, right? So, I have to put myself first. I cannot be there for the community if I'm not there for myself. If I only have 50%, like they don't deserve just that 50%. They deserve 100% of my energy and effort. So, that's why when I get to a point where I'm prioritizing myself more than the community, it's time for me to change the way that my work looks, which is where I'm at now, where I can't work 4 days a week. Like that just is not sustainable. And luckily we have medical directors and associate medical directors that are honest about that. They don't have unrealistic expectations where they're like, oh, I can't believe that you called out, or how dare you resign. Like, it's like, hey, we knew that this was going to come because we've been where you are. They decided to assume a position of, not authority, but like they got a promotion, and so now they have days set aside for that role as opposed to seeing patients on that day. Or there are other people who are decided, oh, I'm going to see patients for 3 days out of the week, and then those other 2 days I'm going to go work on the Hill and do like political advocacy stuff. Me, I'm like, okay, well, it's better if I can determine what days I'm going to work, because there is an obligation that comes with being a faculty member. Like you have to work with medical students, you have to work with residents, you have to work evenings regardless of if you want to or not. Like it's not like you can say, oh, I'm available on this evening, but I can't work on this evening. Like the schedule is just made based on the availability of the providers. And so for me, I need to have some predictability in my schedule, and I also need to have the freedom to focus on raising risers. I feel like that's where I'm going to spend my extra time. Like the organization is not going to pay me to work on raising risers, so it's just like another sacrifice that I have to make. So
we'll start working Monday nights. That'll prove to be good. So
Dr. Wolf hasn't accepted that I am changing my role in our current.
I don't hear you. Well, is that you're working overtime now? Okay.
Do you do anything outside of the job?
I don't do any like work-related stuff outside of the job currently. I feel like the job is my life currently, though, and that's probably in large part why. So, actually just applied to work evening overtime so that we could meet patient needs. So I often arrive around 7:30 and don't leave until 6:30, pretty regularly. And then you get home and you're tired and burnt out. My husband has learned that I need to go and like take a bath and not talk to anyone for a good hour once I get home, because my whole job is talking to people. So I feel like there isn't enough time for other things at this point. But hopefully that will change, and maybe I'll learn some boundaries someday and be better at it like you are.
Dr. Bell.
Do you have a therapist?
Well, I don't. I'm a really bad therapy patient. Psychologists are the worst patients. Because you know exactly what people are trying to do when they're talking to you, and you're like, oh, I know this technique. I've used it on kids before. I'm not going that way.
Okay, now I'm back to the doctor.
So, yeah.
I understand.
But no, I have on and off, though. I feel like there are times when it's really needed. especially when burnout gets bad. And there are times when I feel like I can step away from it. The problem is I've moved so much for training, work. I moved here after getting married. I don't have an established person here yet, so. But it's something I've thought about doing, just that I have that person to go back to as needed.
Yeah.
Congratulations on the marriage.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
They just had an anniversary.
Yeah.
Oh, happy anniversary. Let's go. That's awesome. What do moments of happiness and joy look like for you? Like, where do you find that? This stuff.
This is gonna sound lame, but I find the most happiness and joy like when families come in to see me at work and they're excited to see me, or they're like, "Oh, Dr. Wolf, it's been a while. We need to get back on your schedule." I had one family tell me that I was her people, and I was like, that's the best thing that I could possibly hear. So I think that's why work taking up my life works for me right now, is just because I'm getting enough of those moments. But then when you're having a slow week, or when you're having a week with a lot of hard families, or if you've had to make a report or things like that, those are hard weeks, and those are the weeks where it feels like, no, I need to step back for a bit.
Are you able to find joy outside of work?
Yeah. Work is most of my life, though. I'm not gonna lie. No. My husband and I do a lot of weekend activities. He is a planner. The one thing we argue about is how many weekend activities we do. So he drags me to those, and I do find them enjoyable once I'm there. I do a lot of art stuff. I was an art major in undergrad, so I took some classes. I learned how to spin yarn. I now use my grandma's antique spinning wheel to spin yarn because apparently they're really expensive to buy new. So things like that I think bring me joy as well. But I truly find joy in my patient interactions. I think that's having a good interaction with a patient is what satisfies me most these days.
I love how you said, until I get there. Once I get there, I find joy, but the whole time, it's a fight.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally a fight. Totally a fight. And then we get there and I'm like, okay, I feel less exhausted. This is kind of fun. I guess you were right. And then if there's a line for something, it goes back to that. I'm like, well, you dragged me here, so I think you need to stand in that line.
That's fun. That's awesome.
You guys recently went sailing, didn't you?
We did. We got our beginner sailor's license. So we learned how to sail a small sailboat with two of our friends. And now we're able to rent and sail if we want to.
Nice.
Was it what you imagined? Because you had said you were hoping you would just be lounging and drinking beer.
They didn't let me do that. They made me take a paper test at the end. No, we all had to rotate positions. There was no food and no beverages on the boat. It was truly a course, but it was fun and it was relaxing to be on the water. She's saying that my husband signed us up without checking with me, and he was like, "Oh no, we can't do that this weekend because we have sailing lessons." And I was like, "What do you mean we have sailing lessons?"
That's hilarious.
we don't own a boat. So yeah, I was like, I'm gonna make him do all the lessons and I'll just relax on the boat. But that's not how they work.
And now you have to get a boat so that you can relax and invite your friends.
It's true.
Like me.
It's
true.
It's definitely a you moment right here.
Yeah, you can come sailing with us. I'll make the friends who took the class come too, and then you and I can drink and they can sail.
Okay, that sounds good. Have you seen the people who sit on the Georgetown waterfront and play loud music and dance on their boats at the fair in Miami Beach? Have you seen those people?
I have not, but I think that I need to do that. I'm going to do that. Who do I need to become friends with? Do you know these people?
Who has a boat?
There's a boat battle one time. Who has the better boat on the water?
I don't know. At least go out into the middle of the Potomac, but just doing it along the waterfront is just kind of... Because the people are walking.
Sometimes there's joy in doing lame things, though. I don't know.
Yeah. Facts.
Yeah.
When it comes to the work that you've done so far, what are you most proud of?
I would say I would say in our clinic I'm most proud of having successfully integrated it, but I feel like that wasn't actually hard because all of the providers came like ready and willing. In prior clinics, when you go in as a psychologist and you're trying to integrate care so that people grab you when patients are actually here for their appointments and you're fully working together on treatment plans, there can be some resistance to that because it does interrupt the way your clinic used to flow and how fast patients get out of the door so that you can bring the next patient in. And a lot of people, I think, are more comfortable with this idea of, no, I'll refer to you and then you'll see them next, like when they come in on your schedule. So I would say I've done that in a clinic that was more challenging, and I'm very proud of having been able to do that and get people around to consulting with me. In our clinic, I would say I don't know if proud is the right word, but I came in very nervous about being able to develop rapport with the populations that we work with as a white woman, particularly because if you take the stigma of seeking mental health help and then you add a person to the mix who doesn't look like you and maybe you've learned to not trust through historical and life circumstances, and I was very worried about what that would look like. And I would say, at least to my knowledge, tell me if you've heard something different, please. But to my knowledge, I feel like I have been able to develop that rapport and kind of, I don't know, build relationships with our families. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I don't know that if it wasn't you, that it would be fully integrated. I have a preference toward referring people towards you. Like, if neither one of you was there, I'm giving them your card because I know that you are going to connect with them and they're going to get something from it. We had, before you were the only one there and you had that other person that was working with you, I didn't feel like there was that same connection. Also, at the beginning of my time working in this office, a lot of times patients would say, is it a white person? Like, they would have that question about who the therapist was. I have not heard that in a very long time. So I don't know if the word is getting out about you or if people are just changing their ideas about therapy, but I think it's because of you that things have gone as smoothly as they come.
That's good to hear. That is one of the things that I think sits with me the most with my work is not just am I connecting with families currently, but also this question of, do I need to step back to allow a person who maybe is representative of the population we work with and step in, and we don't have a therapist right now to do that on our team, but I always have that in the back of my head. I love working where we work. I love the people that I work with, and if it came to kind of trying to figure out whether a person on our team might be a better fit, it would be sad to step back, but also I think I would struggle with, would that be better for the population?
I don't think so. I think you make it so that it doesn't matter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. It truly is something that I sometimes stay up at night thinking about. So it's good to hear that from your perspective, because I think you are more likely from patients to hear, no, I don't want to see that person than I am, because they're going to be more comfortable saying that to someone who isn't the person they want to see.
Right. Yeah.
So.
I mean, one time Dr. did couples counseling into the office for one of my families.
I forgot that was your family. Oh my gosh. Okay, fine. You can go down to part two.
That's a bad. But that's also important because it shows that you're willing to go beyond whatever the job title is. Now I'm really big on like, hey, if you're willing to go beyond whatever the job title is, you should make sure to protect whatever life you have outside the office, because like your relationship in the weekends you have with your husband is why you're able to do this great work when you show up to work, which is like major. Because most people be like, it's just a job, and I'm like, so you don't go touch grass, you don't go sail a kite, just nothing else, just that's it? Yeah, the 9 to 5. I'm like, nah, that's scary to me, because it's like, I'm big on my friendships. I check in on my friends, I call people, and even if it's a headache or a place of frustration, sometimes it's just hearing the voices of the people I love and knowing that they're doing what they need to do for themselves. It's just as important as the work that I do, because I think I've said this to you before. If I can't help the people next to me, then what's the point of helping the people past me?
Yeah.
What about the people next to you who don't want help? Like, I mean,
Oh, if they don't want help, that's fine because that's their choice. But I also put little reminders of whenever you are ready for that help, it's available. I can't force what you don't want, because if I force what you don't want, you're not going to put in the effort that you need to get it done. But if you know it's always available, if you know the work is always there, if you know that the person cares and they truly care, I care about the people I complain about the most. That's why I'm complaining about them, because I care. You know, that's what care just looks like. It's not that I hate you, it's that I may be upset that you're not making the best decision for yourself, because things are going to get hard after you get help regardless. So I want whatever better looks like for you after you get help and we figure things out together. Because doing it alone, I mean, that's it. You can get it done doing it alone, but you always get it faster doing it with more people. Depending on what it is. Not everyone's get an equal project part.
Fair.
So what's it been like for both of you working with each other? Because this is like, to me, it's fascinating. Like, I could tell you guys clocking together and like, hey, you got this, I bet.
why is it fascinating?
Because it's nice. It's very rare in the mental health, wellness, and medical space that you get to hear about people who work with their 9-to-5 folks, and those relationships are good outside of, hey, we clocked it and make money together. Like right now, you guys
Now
are
I
making
just feel
money
like you're
together.
making assumptions. I mean,
First out of work experience.
Yeah, like for me, this has been very enjoyable. I'm like, I would want to visit your job, even though I know there's a lot going on. Like, I look at this and I hear the stories, and it's like, I feel like both of you are discovering how much you both care about the same things, and your point of views really do align. And I don't think this is ever a deep discussion you guys have had, because you're busy working. Like, you clock in to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I think I gravitated towards Dr. Wolf because, like I was saying before, I can tell that she is investing quality treatment, so to speak, to the family. So I feel worse when I because I do a lot of salesmanship, right? Like, in the room, I'm like, you really just talk to somebody. I don't think I want to talk to anybody. I don't need any help. I think this person could help you get past this barrier in your life. We'd spend 10, 15 minutes on that. And then if I send somebody other than Dr. Wolf in there and that person doesn't get what they needed, then I'm like,
I'm done.
I set you up for a home run.
It's just reminding me every day that you're not Wolf. That's all I'm hearing right now. Wow.
Well, and I appreciate your salesmanship, right? Because that's part of that integrated primary care model. The idea isn't just that we're there when we're needed and we save patients a trip to clinic, but the other idea is they have their best relationship with you as their PCP, right?
Yeah.
And so you saying, hey, this is actually a good person, makes that much more likely for me to be able to make the connection, because they're hearing it from someone who's trusted.
Yeah.
And that's a huge part of the model, and being able to link people to the care.
Yeah.
So.
And I also was able to see that or get that from her, because after she goes in with the patient, comes back and says, this is what I said, this is what we did. We debrief about how traumatic the story was. And so we just over time have built a rapport at work that for the first time is growing outside of work. No. I mean,
Just a little bit.
But no, also, like, when I had my first event for the Black Boys, Dr. Wolf was like promoting it for me. She attended on a Saturday where she didn't have to. She could have been with her husband. And so, like, just little things like that over time, I think, add up.
You know, I'm always there for those things. I'll promote them. You just tell me what's going on, and I'll be there and promote them and be helpful.
That's awesome. I just, like, when you said your husband has dips on weekends, I was like, it's Saturday. This should have been a today thing. So
It's okay. We made it a thing.
Okay.
He drove me here. He's going to Union Market right now to have some, I don't know what he's doing, but to do something. And we're going to find a place to go to dinner in D.C.
Okay, cool.
So we made it a day.
I got you. I was thinking, but as soon as you said that's it, on Saturday, like today? Today's his day. Oh, that's crazy. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Would you be open to coming back on the show to do group discussions.
What would group discussions look like?
So right now on the Mental Health Monday, and I get so tired of social media, but social media is very necessary.
Yeah.
And a lot of these discussions that I see, I would like more of a professional lens on certain topics that happen to do with like mental health, how families handle things, how families aren't handling things, how professionals handle things, and adding opinion to those circles of what should we actually be knowledgeable about outside of our doctors just being doctors, and what would better rounded opinions and expectations look like when it comes to those topics at those spaces.
Like I was explaining ACEs to him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I said, what?
And I gave the most rudimentary explanation of it, but it would be great coming from a psychologist too.
Yeah.
Like,
I can tell you all about ACEs.
Yeah.
I actually, 2-3 years ago now, published a paper on ACEs and moderating and mediating factors for them. So we can move into ACEs. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I'm literally getting a table built for you. Yeah.
That's impressive. That's
Yeah.
commitment.
That's major commitment on this side. It's this whole room's commitment.
It's an impressive. I love the artwork, you know?
Thank you. I appreciate
that's
it.
coming from an art major.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And outside of that, what's one piece of advice you'd like to give to someone looking to get into the field that you're in now medically?
I think I would wrap back around to the different ways to get into it. My biggest piece of advice is look at social work, look at psychology, look at psychiatry, and kind of figure out what's the way that will work best for what you actually want to do. There is a time and place to go for a psychology degree. There is a time and place to go for that social work degree, and for that MD. And then the psychiatry training afterwards. And so figuring out what would work best for you, and going that route.
You know how they have MD, PhD programs? Could somebody be a psychologist and a psychiatrist, like through a...
So I always joke, I think all the time about taking a 2-year course, becoming a psychiatric nurse practitioner so that I can just prescribe my own meds, because it's so hard to get into psychiatry.
Yeah.
So you could do both, potentially. I don't know if you could do that through like all one program. I haven't seen anything like that out there, but combining programs is more and more common. Even within psychology, you have PhD versus PSYD as well.
What's the difference between those?
The big difference is PhD, you're going to be more research focused, so it's more of a traditional doctoral program where you interview, you identify the faculty whose research you enjoy, that's the one you want to work with. You have less clinical training during that time period, though people will yell at me if anyone with a PhD sees this and decides to. But PsyD, it's much more clinically focused, so you still do a dissertation and do the research component, but the majority of your time, like you're required to spend, I think it's 20 hours a week doing clinical work through the years that you're in that program versus, I think for a lot of PhD programs, it's more like 10, and that can include research-focused clinical work. So if you're doing research that requires you to give screeners to patients, that can count towards that. So it's just a difference in what direction you want to go. PsyDs are becoming much more popular, I would say. And yeah, just focus on the clinical work a little bit more.
I have a fascinating random question for both of you. I'll hear your feelings on this. So I think it was last week this study came out that said kids can't read a book anymore coming out of the pandemic. So due to technology and education, kids no longer have the ability to read a book from start to finish, right? How do you think that's going to affect things in the medical field coming down the line with the next generation of person that wants to be in the medical field? Is that something that's important, or is that something that you could kind of get around that?
Reading?
Yeah. I think it's fundamental. It's necessary for everything.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can't get through medical school without reading.
a book. Like professors in elite colleges and a lot of colleges are realizing students are literally in class and they're like, I'm an A student and I've never needed to read a book. So now in college they're like, well, you got to read a book, and it's like, we're never.
And we're saying we're not limiting it to like physical book. We're saying even ebook or like online. They cannot read.
They cannot read a whole book.
That to me sounds like an attention thing, though, right? So they can read because they're on social media, but it's hard to focus on one thing for long enough to get through it.
Long-term retention and attention.
Yeah.
I mean, the board exams for medical training are 8 hours long or so. I mean, if you can't sit down and read a book, you're probably not going to have the ability to sit through that entire test.
To me, that was scary. I was like, if they can't read books, like where America is going on the education side is about to be a lot more bleak than people realize, outside of already the attack on education and books and having access to information.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I was a kid, I could read 5 books a week. I hated books, but I could read 5 books a week. And as an adult, after college, I despised books, but I made sure, hey, get into novels and other works of literature to reconstruct your love for books, because you have to be able to read no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see things like that, I hear the college professors and I hear what's going on, but it's like, a student is a student. They're only a product of their environment that's developing. So like, what do you think that's going to affect in the field that both of you are in right now?
It's a tricky.
I have so many questions about this study. Like,
I hope I find it so I can send it to you, because when I saw that, I said, I could see that being a thing, because right now we're in a community of adults that a lot of kids are babysit by like iPads. There's a lot less interaction and a lot less, hey, you do need to do this thing. It's more so, hey, I don't have the bandwidth for whatever this little child needs on certain things.
I wonder too how social media is affecting adults, because I don't know that it's necessarily you don't have the bandwidth. You would just rather be on your phone. There are a lot of times that I walk in the room and the parent and the child are both mesmerized by experience, where I have to say, hey, I'm here, ready for your visit. So I think that might be a consequence of just social media affecting everybody.
Yeah, I don't know how it will affect our specific fields necessarily. I do know, though, that there are other countries currently trying to put in policies to limit social media for kids specifically because of the effects that they've been seeing. And so I'll be curious to see what happens in those places, whether it actually successfully manages kind of the contribution that social media might have to things like attention span and ability to focus, and what the US will do as a result as well.
Keep talking. There we go.
But yeah, I don't know how. I can see it impacting selection of who goes into the field, which would be sad, because I think we need more diversity in both of our fields, and unfortunately the kids who are less likely to be babysat by the iPad or the phone are the kids whose parents have more resources. So that's a very big selection that would happen there. I could also see the fields changing to try to compensate for the fact that maybe people start failing more exams or things like that. But then you have to wonder about training and how training is going. So I don't know.
I recently learned that the SAT, now that it's electronic, it adapts to your previous answers. So like if you got a lot wrong before in your last section, then it'll make the questions easier in the next section. Or if you got a lot right, then it'll make them a bit harder in the next section. Which
how does that help? I wonder how they standardize the scores on food.
Well, we took it on paper. There was no adaptability. It was just
you just had to go with it.
Just had to see it through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Make sure your bubbles were filled in all the way, so you got credit for the question.
Scary times. Scary times.
Remember Scantrons?
I wonder what's happening to handwriting too, because I feel like kids don't have to write as much.
No, they don't
It's
know
like
how to
on
write
those you had to do that like whole handwritten essay too.
Yeah, that's it. Kids definitely don't know cursive.
Yeah.
I think I heard an adult, like maybe like a 20-year-old or something, say they only learn the letters in their name in cursive.
Yeah, I think right now that people, like schools are only teaching how to sign your name because that's still something you need to be able to do.
That's crazy.
It's really crazy.
Yeah, where are all the skill sets going?
Yeah.
And if you look at signatures, like even some of the doctor's signatures, like I don't know that that's your name. Like you just
Don't ever look at mine. It's definitely not my name.
Dr. Wolf is such a cool name, by the way.
it is.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, oh, that's cool as hell. So it's going to be awesome. So the whole interview, I've just tried not to geek out every time her name is up.
And her first name is cool. It's Christmas.
Yeah.
It's Christmas, that's true. No.
No.
Thank you for coming back for another episode of Let's Talk Monday. Here with Joy, appreciate you. Thank you, Dr. Wolf, for pulling up. Handshake. All right. Like, subscribe, share.
And comment.
All right. And thanks for coming out. Peace.